Welcome to the Trauma Survivorhood podcast. I'm your host, Sarah, an IFS-informed trauma recovery coach. This show features interviews from guests all around the world as they share their impactful stories and deliver hope and inspiration through their personal post-traumatic growth. We explore and discuss resources and coping strategies to support the survivor community to thrive in their own healing journeys. Enjoy. Welcome back to the Trauma Survivorhood podcast. I'm your host, Sarah. I have with us today Jana Wilson, a victim of childhood abuse and trauma. Jana could have wound up any other statistic. Yet at the age of 12, she had a mystical experience that catapulted her onto a lifelong journey of learning to listen and to love herself. In her breakout prescriptive memoir, Wise Little One, which is set to launch this summer, July 12th, we follow her as she develops a connection to her inner child. Through this connection, she cultivates an unshakable faith in self and spirit, taking full responsibility for her own soul's journey. I love that. Jana is trained with best-selling author and physician Deepak Chopra and New York Times best-selling author Debbie Ford. She's now an author herself, but Jana is also an emotional healing educator, meditation teacher, retreat leader, hypnotherapist, HeartMath facilitator, and founder of the Emotional Healing System. For the past 2 decades, she has taught thousands internationally in group and private retreats. She lives off the grid in the mountains near Santa Fe, New Mexico, with her husband and business partner, Dr. Lance Wilson. When she's not guiding clients into healing, she enjoys hiking, yoga, and watching documentaries. Jana, thank you so much for being with us here today. Let's dive right in. So you had this traumatic childhood, and then tell us a little bit more about this mystical experience when you were 12.
Well, first, thank you, Sarah, for having me. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here with you and your listeners. As you were saying that, I thought, really, I had a mystical experience in the womb because there's precognitive and preconscious trauma. And there's intergenerational trauma, there's developmental trauma. And of course, we focus in Western medicine on developmental trauma, which is the first 7 years of development. And for me, the book begins in the prologue, and I'm sharing what happened to me at 12 years old was really a near-death experience. I came to learn that later when I was watching a documentary that a woman who had drowned in a boating accident. She was skiing behind a boat and got, swept under. And she described the same exact experience I had at 12 years old. Wow. So I think what happens when we're children, for sure, our brain's not fully developed until we're 25. Everything we're taking emotional, even at 12, I'd already sustained so much trauma at that point. 3 years prior to that, my mom had put a shotgun to my brother and my head. She was mentally ill, and my father was an alcoholic, and there was poverty, domestic violence. I mean, it was the classic, kind of Jerry Springer episode family. It was trailer trash, a lot of shame from society, from my community. So it was already really dealing with a lot at that point. And Sarah, I think, when children see their parents who brought them into the world fighting and the violence, and it was intense. I mean, when I was 16, she shot him. So, I mean, it was, they would go at it. It was intense. And luckily, I was pretty much spared from the violence, physical violence from my dad anyway. My brother wasn't. I had one incident with my dad, but at 12, let's go back to that point. I feel like I was very depressed up until that point. I was really starting to get that message. It's, prepubescent. I'm different. I'm not like the other girls. We're poor. I really had a lot of already labels and stigma attached to me. And I was very depressed. And so I remember thinking maybe I should just take a bottle of aspirin, like that would just put me out of I was starting to entertain like suicide ideation at that age. And my brother wasn't there. He was my protector on this evening. And Dad came home and they started like they normally do, all their, fighting, and him particularly, she was the victim, the classic, fawn response. In a stress response, he was the fighter, she would fawn, and they would go at it. But I ran outside of the trailer and I was just praying. One of the gifts of my trauma was that it really forced me into a deep connection to spirit, because that was all I had. And I would just turn within. And, I grew up in the Bible Belt, and we were, they would either be in church and then they'd be backsliders, they were like, and so I got a lot of what I call now downloads from the divine. And those downloads were really significant. So I'm 12 years old. I'm wringing my hands, praying to Jesus to save me. And all of a sudden, I feel a peace that passes all understanding. I'm like light as a feather. I'm no longer burdened. I feel no more heartbreak or grief or sorrow, nothing. I just feel like I'm being cradled. And I ask immediately, like, what's happening? And I look around and I'm just surrounded by nebulas and star nurseries and vapors and clouds of, just the cosmos. Like, it was like, but yet I could still see myself. I could hear the screaming and my dad, hollering and cussing and mom screaming, and could see my little self. And then I was asked, like, what's happening? And I hear a voice. Of course, it's not audible. It's like an internal knowing. And I hear, those are not your parents. I am. And that is not your life. This is. And it was just so mystical and miraculous and magical. And then boom, I was back in my body.
Wow.
And I laid on the grass, and I remember just knowing, I heard once, like, you don't believe you can ride a bike. You can if you can ride one, right? So belief almost implies doubt.
Yeah.
I had a knowingness.
Yeah.
After that moment, I had a knowingness. I was here for a purpose, that this suffering was finite, that it was infinite, that it was going to end. I had already experienced enough suffering at that point to realize it was temporary, it was transient.
Yeah.
So it gave me such a deep faith that I knew no matter what happened, I would be able to make it.
Now flash forward, and here you are now, and you've even founded your own kind of, I guess we'll call it maybe a modality. I'm not sure how you refer to it, the emotional healing system. Tell us a little bit about that. That's, I know, one of the things that you do. HeartMath is another one. And we're very interested to hear about these, these resources that you offer.
So nothing I teach is new. So everything that I teach, when I was very blessed, by the time I was 20, I was very much on my path. And I was traveling around the country, and I was in San Francisco, and I was working for Maybelline. I was just out of 2 years of college. I got this job. I decided to go for it. I was traveling around the country. It was really an amazing opportunity. I learned much more in that job than I would have in college.
Yeah.
And I found this book that was copywritten in 1935, and it's called You. And I opened it. It was a tiny little book in this old bookstore in San Francisco. And I open it up, and it says the most important subject is to truly know and love oneself. And to know and love oneself is to honor the creator. So it was a spiritual book. It even had a chapter called Law of Attraction.
Wow.
1935 or 30, somewhere in the 30s. And so I was starting to practice law of attraction, all these tools at a young age. And I was really voracious in my thirst and that for personal development, for spirituality, for raising my consciousness at a time when this was woo-woo. People weren't talking about this. I'm 57 years old. So, this is a minute ago.
Yeah.
So I meditation was a big piece. My mom going in and out of mental institutions, having electroconvulsive shock therapy, would rewire her brain. And we now know neuroplasticity, right? That's what we're all, that's the end goal now. Oh, let's rewire our brain. Let's don't stay the same person with neurorigidity doing the same thing, expecting different results, right? Let's rewire our brain to become a new supernatural metahuman, as Joe Dispenza calls it, becoming supernatural. So I was doing this at a very young age and became very hungry for who are the best teachers out there teaching really psychospirituality, transpersonal psychology. And of course, Deepak Chopra was really big in the late 80s. And so this is at the time that I'm really coming awake and, looking and searching. So he was my first teacher. And I had no idea what the man was saying. I mean, he was talking quantum physics and I would sit there, but something inside me, Sarah, knew. Like everything inside me just lit up. I was like, and hope, you mentioned hope before. I want to give you a little hack if you're open to it and your listeners. Hope is a beggar. So we really abandon all hope, because once you know you are the creator of your life's experience, you don't have to hope for anything. You just get very intentional. So I say we either are practicing it or, I'm practicing, or I hope things will get better. No, I'm intentional. Things are going to get better. Right. It's a shift in the
nice
word.
Reframe.
And Pema Chodron, the Buddhist nun, she says, abandon all hope. So there's many spiritual teachings that teach about, in Christianity, we think of, the greatest of these, hope and love. But hope, when you think of it, it's kind of like an attachment, a grasping. So when mom would come out of these mental institutions, her brain was, Sarah, she was Dr. David Simon, Deepak's partner, when I worked at the Chopra Center and trained with them, he was he was an amazing teacher. He's passed away now. He's a neurologist. And he told me, because I had a lot of shame around having a mother who was in a mental institution. My family called her crazy, and then, of course, as a child, you interpret that, then part of me must be crazy too, right? Or I have the potential to be depressed or crazy. It's in your genes. We get all these messages. And now, that we know epigenetics, we know that we can create our own genetic makeup, right? We're not destined to that. But she would come back and she would be in a higher state of consciousness, and she would meditate with me. At 7 years old, I started meditating. I didn't keep up with the practice, right? Because, as soon as someone who's had their brain rewired like that, it's like going into rehab. If you don't change your environment when you come out, you're destined to just continue to repeat the same pattern.
Sure.
And that's what would happen with mom. So meditation is the foundation. Everywhere I went, that's all thought leaders kept saying, right? Every spiritual teaching kept telling me, even if it was contemplative prayer, which is the Christian version of meditation. So that's the foundation. I became a primordial sound meditation teacher in 2007 with the Chopra Center. I trained in Jungian psychology with Debbie Ford, and I was on staff with her. My ex-husband and I were partners with her. I traveled the world with her and assisted and, really learned how to be a retreat leader, learned how to take people through deep transformational processes. Became a hypnotherapist, included that in it. But the one thing that I'd never in my professional career got training for was inner child work, which I loved. In the 90s, it was a big piece of my personal growth and relating with myself, but I hadn't found a teacher. The teacher I had, John Bradshaw, he ended up passing away. He didn't have any trainings either. He changed my life. His teachings about healing the shame that binds you is one of his books. So I started to find teachers, right? Like, this is important. People should know this. If I knew this, this would have increased my emotional intelligence. And then I started putting together all these pieces, and I thought, somebody who's really somewhat stable, right? Functioning in their life. They're just not happy. These are key pieces that if they can learn, they have a coherent brain, right? They're not in stress response all the time. Their bills are taken care of. Everything's, then you could teach these tools and it could take their life, to the next level and the next level and the next level if they're consistent with this system that I teach and the practices I teach.
Tell us a little bit more about these retreats. What's like a common goal that someone who's a participant who's coming has?
Yeah, so they're radically life-changing. You leave unrecognizable to yourself. And I remember, when I worked with Debbie, she would tell people that after a shadow process. And a lot of the processes and the work I do is incorporated from the work she did. She's passed away now. But I do forgiveness work in the retreat. So people are healing from breakups, from, my last retreat in San Diego, we had a woman whose son at 21, a year and a half prior to the retreat, had in a freak accident with his grandpa chopping wood in Washington State, had a tree fall on him. Wow. Died. So I took her because normally we won't work with somebody who's right in the throes of grief, because grief is a process. We live in a quick fix society. Everybody's wanting, oh, take a pill, hurry up. And, it takes time. We've got to be patient. Yes. The little wounded child inside is suffering. It's grieving. It's lost its baby, her son. But she was enough time on the, a year and a half that she could be coherent, really sit, because these retreats are very educational, number one. Okay. So we're teaching a lot, my husband and I. He's teaching a lot on neuroplasticity, all the science stuff, because he's a physician. I'm teaching on all the stuff in my wheelhouse, shadow work, the reparenting steps, taking them through hypnotherapy sessions. My daughter works with us. She's an amazing healing yoga therapist. So we start every day with meditation. They get their mantra. We do yoga. Then we come together and we have intense sessions. We do breath work. It is 19 years this year. Wow. I've never missed 1 year, not even during COVID.
Wow, that's incredible.
I'm very proud. Yes,
wow.
I'm so
you should
proud. Yeah, because it's, people say, regardless, I think the smallest retreat I've ever led was 16 and the largest was around 80. Wow. And they average around 35. And so I had this dream to write this book, Wise Little One, and tell my story, because people trust me, Sarah. People find me on the internet from Saudi Arabia to Amsterdam to Denmark to Canada. I have clients from all over the world, and they just find me on Google. It's fascinating. Yeah. It's like I said to the universe, if this is my purpose and my wise little one has something to share, then you make it happen. And it did. Emotional healing retreats. People Google that. Yeah. People are looking to heal their emotions. Yeah, it's almost like rehab, but I'm not an addict, but I'm an emotional addict. Right. So I need emotional addiction rehab.
Yes, the freedom there. Wow. Yeah. The power there too, I imagine, comes from the group dynamic and the atmosphere. Obviously you work, one-on-one, and you're working with people, in their own personal traumas. But what is that dynamic like when you get together a group of people all with the same goal? They're all hungry. How are you able to lead all of these? I'm sure some people are having a different kind of breakdown and a breakthrough, and all at the same time. How are you managing all of those, dynamics?
Oh, that's a good question. So certainly holding space, that was a part of my training, sure. Right? Sacred space. Safety is so imperative for people who have been through trauma. If they don't feel safe, so prior to a retreat, to a group retreat, we're talking about definitely private, but prior to group even. So myself, my husband, and people who have been trained by us. So we have a teacher training as well, emotional healing teacher training. So I've been doing this long enough. I have a lot of students all over the country, really the world, but the country, that will connect with participants prior to the event.
Good.
Listen to their story, get a sense of where they're at in their life. Sometimes those calls transpire in us refunding their money because they're not a good fit.
Yeah.
And so we really want to create safe space. So, because there's always, that saying, there's one in every crowd.
Yeah.
My last retreat, we had one of those, and, they had to leave in the middle of the retreat because they were disruptive to other people. So I hold a tight ship. I mean, I'm not playing around. This is serious work.
Yeah.
And I think it makes people feel safe. They know that if someone's disrupting in the group, that I handle it. I'm not afraid. I'm the type of leader and woman that really owns my power and my voice. Yeah. And I know where I'm taking them, and I'm advocating for their inner child, their feelings. They don't realize that. And so I have to sometimes be a little tough. We call it all the people around me, my husband and my daughter, they call it the soul slap. The soul slap is just a little nudge. It's done with love, but it's sometimes jarring to someone. And I learned it from my teacher, Debbie Ford, in really calling out their shadow, calling out what they're, the clown, the person who is always making a joke, like the woman who speaks still like she's 10 years old. If you were on the phone with her, you would think she was a child. Most people won't say anything. They're just uncomfortable with that. Well, I'll call it out. Because they need to know the feedback is important. So we have a saying in our retreats: be open to feedback, immune to criticism.
Yeah.
So it's a high feedback environment, but that's what they're coming for. They might not realize it, but if it doesn't challenge you, it doesn't change you.
True. This. I know you mentioned your book, So Wise Little One, which is coming out this summer, July 12th. Tell us, who is this book for? Why did you write this book? Who should be picking it up and reading it?
Well, July 12th is my grandson's birthday, so
that's
I'm doing it for Grayson. And yeah, he'll be 7. His conditioning years are complete, and I'm proud to say this book is, it's my legacy. It's my legacy to my one and only daughter and my grandson. Hopefully more grandchildren will be on the way, but I broke a cycle, Sarah. I broke a very toxic, dysfunctional, codependent cycle of abuse and from childhood. And I'm proud of that. I want to inspire people. This book is my own personal story of how it shared, because it's a memoir in a novel. Last year, I came out of meditation in February, and I heard clear as day, Spirit say, it's time to write the book. And it was time because it was timing. You know how they say everything's about timing.
Yeah, sure.
So it was timing. Mom passed away from Alzheimer's in July of 2022. So last year. Yeah, this July will be 1 year.
Wow.
So that hadn't happened when I got the sign, the call to write the book. Yeah. But it was imminent, right? She was on the down. She was in a home, and so my brother and I were managing, taking care of her, and there was a lot of healing. So like another, I don't even say the last layer of healing, because I believe as long as we're in this human body, we still got healing forever.
I agree. Yeah. But
it was definitely a big piece, because my mother and my brother, when you read the story, you'll see it was like the 3 of us, because my dad was not present, right? He was gone most of the time. He wasn't there. So mom was really a single mom raising both of us. And so we trauma bond, the 3 of us, and I was the caretaker. And I was going to fix them and make their life good. And I was going to become successful and show them a better way, but they didn't want that. And so in the end, I had to accept that, that I was powerless and helpless over my mom and my brother. And there was, a lot that transpired in those last few years of healing that led me to being able to write the book.
Wow.
And I, of course, use my memory, and memory is very subjective, right? So I interviewed family members. My mom shared a lot of my childhood and her life with me. So I feel like the book is an accurate representation. My brother's read the book. He says he can't believe how good my memory is. He remembers it very similar.
Yeah. Wow.
So it's a story, of going through all of that. But even in the storms, there was always rainbows, even in the traumas and the tragedies and the chaos and the conflict and the fighting, there was still beauty.
Yeah.
There always is, right? But when you're a child, you still have that sense of wonder and imagination. And so what I discovered, Sarah, is that even when I was a child, I actually began manifesting the life I'm living today.
Wow.
I would go in my imagination because I would disassociate from the trauma, right? Life is too much. And that's what children do. They go into their imagination and they can't handle the circumstances, so they disassociate. Yeah. Well, the disassociation for me became my superpower. And I would just imagine, and then I started to manifest. My imagination is what I would read Cosmopolitan, all the models are going to Costa Rica. I would imagine myself in these places. Yeah. And of course, now we know clear intention for what you desire, elevated emotion, you begin living in a future that hasn't happened yet, and all of a sudden it starts coming towards you.
Well, you certainly have a lot to be proud of. We're just very happy to hear your story and to raise this awareness of the possibilities and the potentiality of life. You're definitely a walking, talking billboard for potentiality. So I appreciate you sharing your story. Before I let you go, I want to, just honor and acknowledge all of the beautiful resources that you're bringing to trauma survivors. You've written a book, you're doing these healing retreats, you're practicing all different types of spiritual modalities and healing teaching for the survivor to find emotional freedom. And we love that and honor that. Question for you: when you were healing, what was some of 1, 2, 3, however many you'd like to share, just the most catalytic, helpful healing tools that you had at your disposal when you were getting started in your journey?
Well, I think, learning to be. There's a saying, if you can't do nothing well, how do you expect to do anything well? So learning to sit in stillness and silence. I would have been diagnosed probably with ADHD as a child because, of course, I had complex post-trauma. And I couldn't sit still. My shoulders were always up here. They still kind of tend to do that. I was very hyperactive. And my grandmother was known to sometimes cut off a piece of a Valium and give it to me.
Just to calm
Sit
you down.
still, calm down. Yeah.
And
adverse childhood experiences. There's a 10 question you're familiar with that your listeners can look up. It's called the ACE. I scored 10 out of 10.
Yeah. Wow.
So there was a lot, but as I said, if there's a resource that you can turn to and you create that, and children are very resilient, right? They're very resilient, I believe, because we're still tethered and connected to spirit. We haven't fully, stepped into this human incarnation yet. We're still pretty connected to spirit, but my resource was spirit. At a young age, when you read the book, I talk about getting slain in the spirit in church. I had mystical experiences. They were common for me because I made the spirit world more real than the physical material world.
Yeah.
And now we understand that is the key to manifestation, right? That's the key to changing our lives. So I look at my trauma as I wouldn't change anything.
Yeah.
I would go back and do it all over again if it led me here. I met my beloved. I met the man of my dreams at 49 years old on a plane that I wasn't supposed to be on by listening to my inner child at a meditation retreat. So the answer is absolutely, unequivocally meditation, like learning. And my mom started teaching me that young. So even though I'd be hyperactive, I'd also retreat. I consider myself an extrovert, but really I think I'm an introvert. I can be extroverted, but I need a lot of quiet time.
Yeah.
I say it's because of the trauma. I'm complicated. I need time to kind of be with little Jana, be with myself and be quiet and be in nature, hiking with my dogs. And, all of that really matters so much, stillness and silence. People resist meditating so much, but really the whole purpose of meditation, Sarah, is to become aware when you're lost in thought.
Yeah.
That's all it is. People are, I thought you're not supposed to think. That's impossible.
That's not how the brain works. Yeah.
So it's just, I'm aware I'm lost. That's a superpower. Now, if I'm aware I'm lost, then I can come back to the present moment. So the emotional healing system is really based on emotional intelligence skills. Everything is self-awareness, self-management, how to regulate your emotions, then social awareness, how to be aware of others, and relationship management. So you have healthy, loving relationships that mirror back to you the love and attention you give to yourself. So meditation is it. Deepak would always say this, and it would blow my mind. If he would say, if I was given a diagnosis, cancer, anything, and they said, you only have one thing you can choose for healing, he said it would be meditation.
Jana, thank you so much for joining us today. Tell everyone where they can find you. When the book is out, where is it going to be found? Tell us your website, your socials. How can we connect with you?
Okay. Thank you, Sarah. So the book comes out July 12th. It'll be on Amazon, every distribution. I mean, my publicist has, we're really wide distribution.
Awesome.
So Barnes and Noble, Kobo, everything. It'll be an Audible. Soon as my voice gets better, I've been sick, I'll be recording it in the studio.
Beautiful.
And so we have a retreat coming up in September. I do want your listeners to know that because I was a single mom for 7 years with my daughter, Taylor, I offer full scholarships to group retreats. That's the tuition part of the retreat, which is $850 for a 5-day retreat. It's very affordable. That doesn't include, of course, travel, hotel accommodations, and food. But we do give a full scholarship. So if anyone's listening and they're interested in that, all they have to do is reach out at emotionalhealingretreats.com.
Love it.
And the book website is janawilson.com or wiselittle1book.com, but janawilson.com. And even at janawilson.com, it can redirect you back to Emotional Healing Retreats. So they can find all the socials are on the websites. They can click on that: Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, all of that, YouTube. And
all the good places.
Awesome. Putting myself out there. It's been difficult because, as I said before, I tend to not want, they're like, oh, you need to do a lot of video and talking. And I'm like, oh, I just feel, I really applaud you for doing podcasts. And
I have fun with it. It's like a creative outlet for me. So plus I get to meet wonderful people from all over the world. So it is really special. I love that. Thank you again so much for being here. We're going to have all of that linked up, all of your sites and the book and the retreats. We're going to have all those links in the show notes down below so that everyone can check that out and reach out to you and connect that way. So Jana, thank you again for sharing your afternoon with us. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. You too. Alrighty. Bye, Sarah.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening or watching this episode of Trauma Survivorhood. For more info, show notes, and links, check out the episode guide below. Until next time, be well, survivors.